Capture the Passion.
Welcome to Capture the Passion, Season 2, Episode 5. My name is Jorge Ramirez. And today we're going to talk about first generation students. A lot of the times we sort of feel like if we don't belong or the resources are not available to us. I want to reassure you that there's an abundance of resources out there for us to be successful academically. Today we have Jaynelle Granados, a USC grad student, and she's going to talk to us about her journey. Jaynelle, tell us about yourself.
Yeah, my name is Jaynelle. I use she, her, aya pronouns. I current student at USC, pursuing both my bachelor's and my master's degrees. And I actually went to community college first. I'm from Tucson, Arizona. So I did 2 years there and then transferred to USC like 3 years ago.
If I may ask, you pronounce your name Jaynelle.
Yeah.
Okay. Is there a reason behind that?
Yeah. I think growing up, people really struggled to say Jaynelle. And so I kind of accommodated it to make it easier for people. But I actually do prefer the Spanish pronunciation that you just did, Jaynelle. But yeah, it was a lot of that, just people couldn't say it. So I was like, okay, fine, just say Jaynelle. And at one point it was even like, okay, fine, just call me Jay.
Call me Jay.
Yeah.
I asked you because my name is Jorge. And I have so many times, and sometimes it can be very frustrating, even triggering when people call me George. It's not George, it's Jorge. I'm Mexican born, and it's really frustrating for me. George is spelled with the G, Jorge is with the J, and it takes me back to my first experience with a teacher, first grade, East LA College, East LA Community. I went to Malabar Elementary School, and a teacher there who, I guess my name was too difficult for her. She changed it. She changed it to George, and she told me, in her exact words, "You know Mexico, you USA, you George."
Wow.
And ever since then, I make it a point to say that it's Jorge. It's my identity. This is who I am.
Yeah.
Is there something similar with you to why you prefer one over the other?
Yeah, I think so. I think really similarly. I also come from like a Mexican background, and so like my family, my parents call me Jaynelle. But yeah, it was also kind of in school where this kind of like socialization began of
Right.
like we can't accommodate to the Spanish, so you have to accommodate to us, and we have to say it in English. So I do agree. I had shared before that at one point I was like introducing myself as Jay to people because that was even easier than Jay now. But then I was really intentional and really made it a point once I came here to USC to not introduce myself to anyone as Jay and rather really have them call me Jay now. I think in reclaiming some of that of like what you're saying of like my identity. And even though I do prefer Jaynelle, the Spanish pronunciation, I don't know. I think Jaynelle has become a part of my identity as well, and all the things that I do in school, everyone knows Jaynelle. So it's a little bit of both.
So let's talk about where it started for you. You're not a state student. You did your community college at Arizona.
Yeah.
What was that like in comparison to where you're at now, Southern California, USC, one of the universities that's most recognized, not just in Southern California? Has there been a culture shock? Has there been maybe an identity crisis?
Oh my gosh, yes, absolutely, all of that. I think Tucson is a lot where I'm from. I think I was surrounded by a lot of other like Mexican folks who looked like me and spoke like me. And I think transitioning to USC and being in LA, I had assumed that the same thing would be here. But that wasn't quite my experience at USC. I definitely felt some of that culture shock of like, wait, there's actually not a lot of students in these classes that look like me or that I can relate to, that I can like really talk to. So that was really hard. Because I wasn't expecting that. I really thought campus, my classes would be just as diverse as LA is, or, at least that's the perception I had being out of
Right,
state.
right.
And so, yeah, that wasn't what I
Do you
found.
think it's sort of like a misconception that society has that because it's a university in LA that it's going to be a big melting pot and you're going to find people from all over the place? Do you see as USC being that type of campus, or is it not? What's
Hmm.
your experience been like?
Yeah, I think that's really interesting because I think um, overwhelmingly it's a bit of a melting pot for sure. I think you can get like lost in the shuffle, right,
Mm-hmm.
in the majority. Um, but then there are instances where, like LSA, the Latino Student Association or Assembly, and PASA, and all these other like cultural orgs
Mm-hmm.
are making things happen,
Mm-hmm.
right? And they have so many events, and you see the things that they do around campus, and like
Right.
their social media presence. And so I think for me, it's been really nice, like reminder of like, wait, like, yeah, there are a lot of like,
There is representation.
right,
Right.
there is, and like to the extent that that happens is like a different conversation. But I think there are like small pockets of
Mm-hmm.
those communities making stuff happen, and yeah, just making sure their presence at USC is known and recognized.
How important is representation for you to be able to go to class and see your peers and say, you know what, this is my people, or even professors to say, you know what, hey, I see that representation. Is that something that's important to you? Did that play a factor into you deciding to come to this university, or was it mainly like, you know what, I'm going to be there, I'm going to accomplish my academic goal and then go on with my career?
Yeah, I definitely do think it's really important. You know, in my classroom, like if I don't feel like I can connect with like one or two of my classmates or like my professor, like, that really puts like my affective filters up.
Mm-hmm.
And, I feel less inclined to like share in class, or, I'm a little bit more reserved because I, sometimes maybe like don't feel like it's a safe space to
Mm-hmm.
share, or maybe my identity isn't like as welcomed or as celebrated, or, as reflected in the curriculum. And so it's definitely really important to me seeing that reflected in my classroom and in my professors, and also really played a big part in my decision to come to USC, um, because when I was transferring, there was another school back in Arizona that I was going to transfer to. Um, and so when I got the news of USC, like it shifted everything, and you know, not an easy decision to make. But I think when I was making that decision, some of the things that I thought about was definitely like where I felt I could be more supported as a first generation student, but also like lots of the other identities that I hold in my background, and where I just kind of felt where those would be more supported, nurtured, rather than me having to fight like the resistance. And um, yeah.
So let's get into that first generation student. What has been some of the challenges for you, coming from a community college going into a 4 year university now as a first generation student? What are some challenges that you see that are very prevalent?
Yeah, I think lots of things are, of course, more of the like normal, typical ones of like, how do you apply to financial aid, or how do
Right.
you even apply to like the transfer application, right? Because those are a little different as well. So like, how do you do those things? That was tricky for me because there was no one else in my family who was really in college, and much less like transferring. So that in itself was like a different process. Um, and so some of those like challenges and barriers exist, but then in the actual transition, it was just kind of like, you know, feeling a little like lonely and like out of place,
Right,
and like the
right, right, right.
imposter syndrome, especially being out of state. Like, there was a lot of things going on in that first semester that I was actually out here. So I think for me, what really supported me in both like figuring out how to apply to financial aid, but then also just like figuring out my footing out here, I think was just really having like a strong support system and like community. I was really thankful to have a really great community org back home in Tucson, who supported me along the way. and shared some resources of like colleges to apply to, transfer
Right.
to, scholarship lists. So lots of that kind of support, but then as well like that mentorship component of like, this is what transferring has been like for some other folks. This is just some of the things that you might expect in higher education. So yeah, I think.
So you had some form of mentorship at the community college level
Mhm.
that was able to answer those questions into how do I do this, how do I do that, the next phase. I'm curious to know if we can talk about in your family, how difficult was that to try to get that support from them, or even an understanding or awareness of this is higher ed. There's different levels of higher ed. There's different pathways to take. Did you have that?
With like family?
Yes.
Yes. I think something like first thing that comes to mind is just terminology that's used. Like college versus university. That was, I think, sometimes something we had to like kind of overcome, right? Because sometimes for some reason going to a college is seen as like less than instead of like going to a university, And so that was kind of something that like my family and I are still kind of learning as like my younger siblings are going into graduating high school now and transitioning. It's kind of like, no, like a degree is still a degree regardless of like where it's coming from. And so that, but then again, when I was like transferring from community college, like my parents wanted me to make a certain decision and I wanted to make a certain other decision. And so that was just also really hard of like, the things that I like want and need and I'm looking for in a university. Maybe
Did they want you to stay home?
Yeah.
They
They did. And like it makes sense. Yeah. But like I said, I think like the things that I was like looking for and I wanted next, like I just felt like I could get at a different institution. And so, yeah.
So how are they? They're good with it now?
They are, yes. They like love saying that I'm doing a master's degree and I got them like proud USC like mom and dad shirts, and so they like love to wear it now. So but it was a transition for all of us for sure.
Okay, so as a first generation student going into 4-year university out of a community college, I can relate to a lot of the struggles. I think I fall under the immigrant because I was born in Mexico, so I'm not technically first gen. I think I'm immigrant. My daughters would be first generation. Would they? Well, however that goes. The struggles that I would see, and you talked about, is that imposter syndrome. And to convincing myself that I am good enough to be at whatever university that I got in. And I only applied to one after my community college. While I was at community college, being among the first one, my older brother, he did a trade school. So I was the first one going to a community college. And to my family was that same thing. And it's just a community college. Everybody gets in. You apply, you're in. Why do you want to waste your time there? What's the point? You're going to be stuck there. You're never going to get out. So the little understanding of college or higher ed that my family had was just don't go to community college. So pretty much I was like the guinea pig where, I wasn't there for 2 years. I was there a little bit longer than 2 years. I didn't have the best GPA. And when I finally figured out that, hey, there's something beyond this, I was like, hey, now I can share this with my siblings. But transitioning onto that 4-year university was even more of a struggle because that imposter syndrome just magnified 1,000 times. Who am I going to talk to? I don't even know where the student center is. I have no idea this campus and what classes am I going to take? I came in, declared a major, but I don't know what classes to take. Tell me about the resources that you have found to be useful. So when students that are at community college now and they transition over to a 4-year university, they don't have to go through that struggle. Tell us about some resources that are available.
Yeah, so like I mentioned before, that there's that like nonprofit org that I got a lot of support from, and so they work with a lot of immigrant students as well, and so having just those resources and that support because I come from a family of mixed immigration statuses, and so I have seen, what that kind of like inequality, inaccessibility to higher education is like. And so I mentioned before, like a college list or a scholarship list, just like having those as like starting places was really helpful. And so that org has really helped me. And then now kind of at USC and like in continuing my education there, a lot of like the student centers, like you're saying, at USC, there's like the First Gen plus Student Success Center, right? And they house lots of different identities and communities. And so some of their resources there as well, in just like the spaces that they host social events, because I think that's something that's also really important, right? We're not just students, we're also like people, and we want to also hang out and have fun, and do all these things. So those resources have been helpful, and then I know USC also has lots of support in the like legal aspects. So right, there's like immigration clinics folks can go to for support. And there's Student Basic Needs Center for food if you're facing some food insecurity. Right. So I know those are some resources that have been really helpful.
And I think a lot of people have this misconception that, I can only get financial aid if I am a certain immigration status, and it's not available to everybody. You briefly touched on that. I remember reminding my parents, because most of the time to them it was like, remember, Jorge, we're poor. Remember, Jorge, we don't have money to pay for it. And it's like, now it's even more stressful, right? They are available, right? And there's different types of, you mentioned the scholarship list. There's grants. And in a previous podcast, we talked about student loans and how those aren't necessarily as bad as people think they are, because they have this their perks. And if you want more information, go back and check that other podcast out, financial literacy. But tell us about those financial resources that are available. And I know you're a USC student and you're bringing up the resources there, but these resources also exist in other universities. So tell us about some financial resources that students can take advantage of.
Yeah. I think for me, I keep going back to just scholarships, because that's really what has like covered or bridged the gap. And I think, as you mentioned, USC is one of the schools that does offer some generous financial aid. And so, I have that support, and then the scholarships that I like applied to both in school, both like from USC and outside orgs. But also, like you said, right, this looks different at lots of other universities and schools, and like definitely depends on if it's like a private or public school, and what that looks like. But I think for me, that has definitely been like just my biggest financial resources, and where I get that financial support, because I was lucky enough to only have to do that. You know what I mean? Right. I don't have to take out loans, or like I don't really have to work to stay, be able to pay for school. I think the struggle is like a little bit different, because it's like, if I don't reapply to scholarships every year, then I won't be in school, because then I won't be able to pay for it. But up to now, I have been really fortunate to be able to cover with just that.
Yes. Tell us about the process of applying for a scholarship. What does it take? What do they look for? And how much money do they give you? And how can I use that money? Does that money needs to be spent specifically for my classes? Can I buy books? Can I buy transportation or even meals? What's the expectation? And take us through the whole process of applying, the expectation, and then the reapplying that you just mentioned.
Yeah, there's so many scholarships for like tons of different things. Lots of ways you can use it. Like definitely depends on the scholarship and those requirements. But for me, I always just really like to start with a search of like scholarships for first generation students.
There you go.
And that'll take me down a rabbit hole. I'll figure out the ones that like make sense for me, that match, that I can meet the criteria, the eligibility. And then just like start writing like the scholarship essay. And I think for me, that's the hardest part. because there's, you know, the tedious like writing and like getting down my story, but then also like when you have to go through the whole like feedback process. And I think for me that's been really helpful. I was told, you know, previously to always have someone like provide feedback on my essays, and I'm really glad someone told me that, and I think definitely makes you more, you know, more competitive applicant and scholar. But again, I think that's one of the hardest parts of just being able to like work through all of that, receive some of that feedback that sometimes, you know, makes the process even longer,
Right.
you know, drags things out, but really helpful and useful. So, you know, after like writing feedback, you apply, you will hear back within, I don't know, like a month or two, depending on the scholarship. And then, yeah, there's scholarships that go directly to your university or some that go directly to you. And again, the process looks different at USC. You know, when those scholarships come in, they might lower grants that they give you to compensate, I don't know, math that they do. But then, yeah, some scholarships are open for you to use on tuition. Some are just like room and board, or, you know, those that you get directly to you, you can choose to spend on books, groceries, 'cause that's also really important.
Right.
Yeah.
So, and then you could reapply for these scholarships. As long as you're a student, you can continue reapplying. Do they have any type of criteria, GPA, other restrictions?
Yeah, in terms of like reapplying, I know a lot of the ones that I've reapplied to really just require that you maintain the GPA, and really just want to hear like follow up, like, you know, you were at this point last year, what are you up to now, what are you doing?
Okay.
I know that's like a conversation I had like last year, and they were like, hey, like, we know you were working with this org, are you still with them, what's going on now? So yeah, just a few like updates to hear from how you're doing.
So would you say that you've found it difficult to access these types of scholarships, or do you think that they're pretty much readily available everywhere? It's just a matter of finding that path to access them.
Yeah, I think it's a little bit of both. I do think there's so many scholarships available out there, but then I do think depending on that eligibility, right, it like limits your scope a little bit. I mentioned earlier that I come from a family of like mixed immigration statuses, and so that in itself impacts the scholarships that I have access to, because you know, some will be like have a certain requirement that like needs citizenship, or, you know, providing social security numbers for scholarships and stuff like that, and so that limits the number of scholarships people can apply to. So yeah, I think a lot of like navigating, figuring out, like I said earlier, like what makes sense for you. Yeah.
I think through, and I hear you talking about the access to resources, financial resources to help cover costs for tuition. I think for me, for my family, so there's 8 of us. My older brother and myself were born in Mexico, and then everyone else was here. My parents' biggest concern with us, they always wanted us to have a career. That was like my dad, before he passed, he said, make something of yourselves. You know, don't work the way I did. He was in landscaping, and he really prided himself into embedding that and ingraining that in us to make sure that we found a career that we liked. However, the other side of it was I can see the stress into, how am I going to pay for it? You know, what are we going to do? And as I hear you talk about the financial resources that are available, even if you do have a mixed immigration status, I think that's important for our audience to understand that there are companies out there that want to give you money, that want you to go to school, so you can be successful. And I think the mindset might be something like what my dad had, where, you know, do something with your lives. I want to know, with your career path, let's just hypothetically say, if you didn't have these scholarships available, would it have changed your academic goal?
I think so. I think I maybe would have stopped at my associates in community college, or I may have just stopped at a bachelor's, or I don't even know if I would have finished any of those degrees, because it was that financial component was definitely like the biggest factor for me and my family. And, you know, community college was a little bit more affordable. And even then I still had scholarships from the community college to help support that. But again, if I hadn't, I don't know how I would have completed that and how I would have made it up to now. So I definitely think it's huge.
Right. And two things that you mentioned, the community college here in California, we have, we're getting to that point where community college is going to be free for 2 years. Anyone that you have to be out of high school, and there's a criteria for it too. And then pretty much after that, you're able to transition over to your, hopefully for your university, private or public, and continue with your career path. I want to hear from you, and I want to know your perspective. I am at a community college right now, okay, and I'm struggling with money, and my family doesn't have any money, but I really want to get a bachelor's degree because I know that I can make something of it. What's discouraging me is that tuition. Mm-hmm. What advice would you give me to tell me go for it? But I don't want student loans.
Yeah, so fair. You know, I think one of the first things that come to mind, again, is like figuring out what scholarships are available, what resources are available. I know in my community college back home in Arizona, there was community colleges like have like foundations. And so those scholarships are available as well within the school, but then the ones, you know, all outside of the school and lots of different like orgs, companies, just folks who want to donate and fund education. So, you know, there's some of those like practical resources that support, but I think I would also say like, you know, if being in a similar situation when I was like in community college and even just now, I think what I really would have wanted to hear was just like let's figure it out. Mm-hmm. Really having that support of someone, and again, being first generation, right? Like there's not many people you can talk to or ask for help. Right. So I know for me, I really would have appreciated and like I really needed that. And so I think, just, you know, like the reassurance of like, we'll figure something out together, whether that's the student support services on campus, or other community orgs, other family. I think it's really hard, and definitely one of like the like bones I have to pick with education of, right, it's just so inaccessible and like inequitable, and like being able to afford it should not be the issue, right? The barrier. Like I know back home in Arizona, like, you know, sometimes students were in situations that they had to like reduce back to being part-time instead of full-time, right? Because that meant that they could afford it a little bit more because they were taking a few less classes. So, I would say, you know, we'll figure something out and you don't have to do it alone.
Right. So, being part of CPTP, you know, we emphasize mentorship and we tell students, you know, use your mentors as that support system to help you find avenues. Like you said, you had an organization that helped you see the resources that are available to you. How important do you think is to find people that can relate to you, that have gone through the path that you want to get to help you alleviate some of that stress as you're going through this journey?
Yeah, it's super important and helpful. I know, like I said earlier, right, like they were able to offer me some of the more like logistical support of like how to apply, but a lot of that emotional and like mental support as well when I was like, oh, what do I do? Like, you know, how do I like continue having conversations with like admin to make sure like it makes sense for me to go there, all these things. So it's definitely, I think, really important. And then just building that strong like support network, support system. And there's so many different ways folks can support now, later on. I know like you've helped me like review scholarship essays, and, you know, folks back home have written me letters of recommendations. You know, they've connected me with other folks for like internships and volunteering opportunities and all these things, right? So I definitely think like mentorship and support systems are really, really important.
Right. And also to or your concluding thoughts to our first generation students out there. Um, what what do you say to them? They want to do something with their lives. They want to pursue a career. What is that resonating advice that maybe you have gotten that you want to pass along to our first generation students?
Yeah, I think I would say that the journey will be tough. There will be maybe some unexpected turns, rocks along the way, that'll really try to trip you up. But I do think, it's very possible. And something that's resonating a lot with me and has over the past few years, like, this resilience that we talk about in students, first generation immigrant students, all these identities that have been minoritized and oppressed. And that's great, but the fact that we have to be resilient is not great. You know what I mean? Like, the system should not make us work this hard, figure it out by ourselves, or just plainly figuring it out, right? Like, these supports should already be in place. And so I say that to remind us that we can do it, and it's not our fault. It's not, we have to maybe work a little bit harder than our peers with more privilege, perhaps. But I think despite everything, there is that incredible, like, resilience magic that happens in the community. Right. And so I think just continuing to prove, like, our greatness and that resilience that is so complicated, but nonetheless it's there. And I think, it can definitely happen, and it may take a little longer, may be a little difficult, but it can definitely happen.
Thank you so much for your time, your encouragement, and I hope that this resonates with us as first generation students, because admire everything, your journey that you've gone through. Thank you for continuing to be resilient. You keep doing, and we'll see you guys next time.
Capture the passion.